There's a workbench in my garage that I've had since I was 22. Nothing fancy. 2x4s, a viz clamp to one end, some old pegboard on the wall with hooks where my tools hang. My father never left me much. A name and a gap in the house, but somehow I ended up with his habit of keeping things organized. Every tool has a spot. Every project gets finished. The night all of this started, I was standing at that bench, sanding the edge of an oak tabletop I'd been working on for 3 weeks. I had the radio going low. The shop smelled like cedar and sawdust. I wasn't thinking about anything complicated. Then my phone rang. The name on the screen was Frank Hargrove. My boss. The man who had given me a job when nobody else would. The man who had watched me work my way from a pickup and go grunt to site foreman in 2 years. I picked up. He told me to come to his office the next morning. Said he had something to discuss. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound like there was a problem. He just sounded like a man who'd already made a decision and was getting ready to deliver it. I said I'd be there. I set the phone down and went back to sanding the table. But I couldn't stop thinking about that voice. Calm, certain, the way it sounded when a deal was already done. My name is Caleb Marsh. I'm 29 years old and I've lived in Clarksville, Tennessee my whole life. I work construction. I have since I was 17 and my mother's knee finally gave out and she couldn't keep working the night shift at the plant. I picked up whatever I could find: framing crew, drywall patching, fence work in the summers. I learned by watching and by asking dumb questions until people got tired of me asking and just showed me how things worked. By 21, I had my contractor's license. By 23, I was subcontracting on bigger builds. By 26, I hired on with Hargrove Construction and stayed. Frank Hargrove built his company from a single flatbed truck and a worn-out nail gun. He didn't come from money. He came from the same kind of background I did. A busted town where the only way out was to build something with your hands until nobody could ignore you anymore. I respected that about him the first time I heard it. I respected him even more when I realized he ran his crews fair. He paid on time. He expected real work, and he gave real work back in return. My mother always said you can trust a man who doesn't look at a job like it's beneath him. Frank never did. My mother raised me alone. She still lives in the house I grew up in, 15 minutes from the yard where I park my truck. I call her on Sundays. I bring her groceries on the last Saturday of every month. She's the one who taught me how to be decent when it would have been easier not to be. My father was gone by the time I was 8. I don't remember much about him except the quiet he left behind, the kind of quiet that settles into a house and stays there even after everyone moves on. That quiet followed me for a long time. It made me careful. It made me bad at asking people for things. It made me believe, for years, that I was fine as long as I kept working and kept my head down. I was fine. I just wasn't anything else. I didn't date much. I didn't have the kind of confidence that makes people notice you at parties I never went to anyway. I had the workshop and the job and the weekends where I built things that nobody asked for. Shelves, chairs, a bench for my mother's porch, a cabinet for a neighbor who couldn't afford a real one. I built because it felt like proof, like every finished joint said, "You're still here, and you made something good." I just never thought anyone else would ever care what I made. The night before Frank called me into his office, I lay in bed for an hour staring at the ceiling fan. Not thinking about anything specific, just feeling the familiar weight of a life that was decent and steady and completely still. I had no idea what was about to happen to it. Frank's office was on the second floor of the company building, overlooking the equipment yard. Big window, no curtains. He liked being able to see what was moving down there without having to leave his desk. I got there at 7 in the morning. His assistant waved me up without saying anything. Frank was already standing when I walked in. He shook my hand the way he always did, firm, quick, no ceremony, and pointed at the chair across from his desk. I sat. He stood by the window with his back to me for a moment, looking out at the yard. 2 of the crew were loading rebar into the flatbed. A mixer was turning slow in the corner. He said, You know I didn't have any sons. I said I knew that. I've got one daughter, he said. Ellie, he turned around. You know her. I did, in the way that you know someone you've seen a dozen times without ever having a real conversation. Ellie Hargrove came by the office sometimes. She had her father's name on the door and a business degree from Nashville and a few years working somewhere else before she came back to Clarksville. I'd seen her at the company's summer cookout. I'd passed her in the parking lot. We'd exchanged maybe 40 words total. She was quiet. She moved through the building like she was trying not to take up too much space. I told Frank I knew who she was. He sat down then, folded his hands on the desk the way he did when he was thinking through a number, looked straight at me. I want you to marry her, he said. And if you do, everything I've built is yours. The company, the equipment, the property holdings, all of it. Everything, when I'm done, it passes to you both, and you run it. The room was very quiet. The mixer was still turning outside. I said, sir. He held up one hand. Let me finish. I've watched you work for 2 years. You're honest. You don't cut corners. The men trust you. The clients trust you. You're the kind of man this company needs to stay what it is. I didn't say anything. I'm not asking you to perform, he said. I'm asking you to consider. You take your time, you think it through, and you give me an answer. I asked the only question I could think to ask. Does Ellie know about this conversation? Frank's expression didn't change. She knows. I thanked him and walked out. I took the stairs down slowly. My hands felt strange. I pressed them against the railing and kept moving. Ellie was in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs. She was holding a folder of papers, standing near the door that led to the back offices. She wasn't facing me, but she turned when she heard my boots on the last step. We looked at each other. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look like someone who'd just been told her future had been arranged without her input. She looked at me with calm, steady eyes, like she'd been expecting me, or like this moment was something she'd already thought through. She said, "Good morning, Caleb," I said. "Morning." She walked past me toward the back offices. Unhurried, the folder tucked under her arm. I stood there for a moment. Then I walked out to my truck. I sat in the cab for 10 minutes before I started the engine. I couldn't figure out what that look meant. I'd expected shock, or apology, or the polished indifference of someone who'd been told they didn't get a say. I'd expected something I could read. What I got instead was something quieter, something that didn't fit any category I had for it. She had looked at me like she already knew how this was going to go. And I had no idea what she knew that I didn't. I didn't answer Frank the next morning. I didn't answer him the morning after that. I showed up to work, ran the sites, checked the materials, signed off on punch lists. I did my job the way I always had, and I tried not to think too hard about the fact that my boss had just offered me his company and his daughter in the same breath. The trouble was, Ellie started showing up on job sites. Not intrusively, not making herself a distraction. She had always done site visits, I found that out later, but I'd never been on the same project during one. Now I was. She walked the concrete pours with a clipboard and asked clear, careful questions. She knew what a slump test was. She knew how to read a grade stake. She didn't perform being competent. She just was. The second week, I was out at the Meridian Street project, and she pulled up in her white Tacoma and walked the perimeter with me. The temperature had dropped overnight, and the ground was firm. We walked the whole thing without talking much. Near the west corner, she stopped and looked at the framing going up across the lot. "My father laid out that lot himself," she said, "about 15 years ago. He measured the grade with a string and a level because he didn't have money for a survey." I looked at the lot. "Did it come out right?" I asked. She almost smiled. "Close enough." At the end of that week, she brought lunch to the crew. Nothing elaborate. Sandwiches from the diner on 4th, sweet tea in a cooler. The men thanked her, and she waved them off like it was nothing. She sat at the fold-out table in the job trailer and ate a half sandwich while I finished reviewing a materials order. I didn't ask her about the arrangement. She didn't mention it. We talked about drainage and the weather and the price of lumber, and after a while it felt less like avoiding the subject and more like we'd both agreed, without saying it, to get to know each other first. She started showing up at the trailer most mornings when I was out on a job. Coffee in hand, laptop open, doing her own work while I did mine. She never asked me to talk. She never made it strange. She was just there. I started learning the shape of her. The way she tapped her pen against the edge of the table when she was thinking. The way she went quiet when she was reading something that bothered her. The way she laughed at deadpan observations 3 seconds after everyone else. One afternoon she asked what I did on weekends. I told her I built things. Furniture, mostly. I'd had the habit since my early 20s and I'd never been able to shake it. She said, like what? Tables, mostly, some shelving, a couple chairs. I built a bench for my mother's porch last spring. She asked if she could see the shop. I said sure, expecting her to forget about it. She didn't. That Saturday, she pulled up to my house at 10 in the morning in the same white Tacoma, and I walked her out to the garage. The oak tabletop was on the bench, nearly done. I had the final sanding left. She walked around it slowly, running her hands along the grain the way someone does when they're actually paying attention. You're close, she said. 2 more sessions, probably. She crouched down and looked at the underframe. Checked the joinery at the corner. Stood back up. You dovetailed this yourself? Hand cut. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you put a lot of yourself into things. I kept sanding. I didn't answer. She didn't push. She stayed for 2 hours. We had coffee on the tailgate of my truck, and she told me about her first year at the company, the part where nobody knew quite what to do with the boss's daughter, where she had to earn every room she walked into. She said it plainly, without bitterness. I think people expected me to be decorative, she said. And I'm not particularly good at that. That was the first time I felt something shift. Not something dramatic, just a small movement in the part of me that had been keeping careful distance. She left before noon. I watched her truck pull out of the driveway and stood at the end of the garage for a while. The tabletop was almost done. I thought about the way she'd looked at the dovetail joints. The quiet attention in it, like she understood that some things take longer than they should because they're worth doing right. I went back inside and picked up the sanding block. I didn't know what I wanted yet, but I knew I didn't want to stop finding out. About 5 weeks after Frank's offer, I was finishing up a late walkthrough of the Riverside site when I heard his voice on the floor above me. The building was half occupied. Frank had a habit of using the empty offices for calls he didn't want overheard in the main building. I wasn't trying to listen. But the site was quiet, and his voice carried. I told you. I'm managing it. A pause. That's my decision to make. His voice was lower than usual. Harder in a way I'd only heard when something was seriously wrong on a project. I'm not discussing the timeline. I just need to know she's going to be looked after. Another pause. 6 months is an estimate. I know what an estimate means. I stopped moving. His footsteps crossed the ceiling slowly. I heard him exhale. She doesn't know the medical situation. I'd like to keep it that way as long as possible. I need to make sure there's a plan before she knows. I stood very still. The call ended. I heard him walk toward the stairs. I stepped back around the corner and waited until I heard his truck pull out of the lot. I sat down on a stack of flooring samples and stared at the wall. 6 months. Frank had been having me walk taller sites. Longer project reviews. More of the financial reports crossing my desk. I had thought it was because he was growing the company. I had thought he was building something for the future. He was. Just not the future I thought. He was sick. And the offer, the company, the arrangement, the whole thing, it wasn't about legacy. It wasn't about merit. It was a dying man trying to make sure his daughter wouldn't be alone when he was gone. The question I couldn't shake was the same one I'd been carrying since that first morning in the stairwell. Was any part of what Ellie felt real? Or had her father told her she had to agree, and she was just trying to make the best of it? She didn't know he was sick. That meant she hadn't agreed to protect him. She hadn't agreed out of fear. But it also meant I had no idea what she'd actually agreed to, or why. The next morning I went to the job trailer like normal. Coffee, blueprints, materials list. She came in at 9. I looked at her across the table. She looked back. She said, "You look tired. Didn't sleep well." She nodded, set her coffee down, opened her laptop. Something in my chest went tight, and I looked back at the blueprints. I didn't tell her what I'd heard. Not yet. Derek Hargrove found me at the equipment yard on a Tuesday afternoon. He was Frank's nephew, his older sister's son, and had been working in the company's development division for 12 years. He was 40, put together in the way that came from spending more time in client lunches than on job sites. Good shoes. A company polo pressed like it had been ironed that morning. I'd never had a problem with Derek. We didn't have much overlap. He ran the land acquisition side. I ran the builds. He walked up to where I was checking the inventory list on the flatbed and said, "You got a minute?" I said, "Sure." He didn't waste time. "I know about my uncle's arrangement," he said. "I want you to understand something before this goes any further." I waited. Ellie didn't ask for this. He kept his voice even, neutral, the way people do when they've practiced the conversation in advance. My uncle told her it was a business solution. He told her you were the right fit for the company and that a formal arrangement would protect the succession. He didn't give her a real choice. He gave her a plan. I looked at the clipboard in my hand. "You think she agreed under pressure," I said. "I think she's been agreeing to her father's decisions her whole life. And she loves him enough to believe that whatever he's decided is the right thing." He paused. "That's not the same as her choosing you." I set the clipboard on the flatbed. He kept going. "I'm not saying this to hurt anybody. I'm saying it because I've watched this family for 30 years. Frank means well. He always means well. But he makes decisions and then makes the world line up to support them. The people who love him go along because they can't stand to disappoint him." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Derek looked at the yard for a moment. His jaw shifted. "Because this company should have passed to me," he said. And there it was, the line under the line. Not because I'm family. Because I have given 12 years to this place. I grew up in this company. I watched Frank build it. I know every parcel we own, every subcontractor we've ever worked with, every deal we've ever made. I'm not the villain here. I'm the one who's been here. And I'm telling you, man to man, that what Ellie agreed to wasn't what you think she agreed to. He walked away. I stood at the flatbed for a long time after. The thing about what Derek said was that it fit. Frank made decisions and then made the world line up around them. Ellie loved him enough to go along, and I was the man Frank had decided on, which meant Ellie might just be doing what she always did, accepting a plan she hadn't designed because she couldn't bring herself to refuse. I thought about the tabletop, the way she ran her hands along the grain. You put a lot of yourself into things. I thought about her voice saying it, the way she'd meant it, but meaning something about a table and meaning something about a man were two different things. And I'd spent too many years being invisible to people who should have seen me to make myself believe I was something just because I wanted to be. I needed to know. Not because of the company. Not because of Frank. Because of her. I went to see Ellie that evening. She was at the Hargrove house, out on the back porch with a glass of water and a stack of papers she wasn't really reading. The sun was going down behind the tree line. The yard was still. She looked up when she heard the screen door and didn't seem surprised to see me. I sat down across from her. No preamble. "I heard your father on the phone about 3 weeks ago," I said. "He was talking to someone about his health. 6 months. Something about you not knowing yet." She went very still. "He's sick," I said. "I don't know the details. I don't know what kind or how serious. But I know he's sick, and I know he made the arrangement for that reason." Ellie set the papers down. She looked out at the yard. She didn't say she already knew. She didn't say she'd suspected. She sat with it for a moment the way someone sits with something they had a feeling about but hoped they were wrong. "I thought something was off," she finally said. The way he started wrapping things up, being more deliberate. I nodded. "I'm not here to tell you what to do," I said. "But I talked to Derek today. He thinks you agreed because your father gave you a plan and you went along with it. He thinks you didn't have a real choice." She looked at me then. "Derek thinks a lot of things," she said quietly. "Maybe, but I need to know the truth." I looked at her straight. "Not for the company. I don't care about the company right now. I need to know if you actually want this. If you want me. Or if you said yes because your father needed you to and you didn't know how to say anything else." She didn't answer right away. The yard was still. A bird called from somewhere in the tree line and went quiet. I reached up and unclipped the company lanyard from my belt. Set it on the arm of the chair between us. "If you want me gone," I said, "I'll be gone by morning. No complication. No awkwardness. I'll give Frank my notice and you'll never have to think about this again." I meant it. She looked at the lanyard. Then she looked at me. And the expression on her face was nothing like what I'd expected. It wasn't relief. It wasn't apology. It wasn't the careful blankness she wore when she was protecting something. Her eyes were steady. "Clear," she said. "Can I tell you something?" I said yes. "I went to my father first," she said. Her voice was quiet, not hesitant, just measured. The way someone speaks when they've been carrying something for a while and have finally decided to set it down. Before he ever called you into that office. Before any of it. She looked at me like she needed me to stay with her. "I went to him and I told him that if there was one person in this company he should trust with it, it was you. I didn't say anything. I told him I'd watched you work for 2 years. The way you treat the crew. The way you don't let the clients talk down to the men on the ground. The way you stay late without anyone asking you to." She paused. "And I told him you were the only man I'd met in a long time who looked at me like I was a person and not an asset." The porch was quiet. She turned and faced me fully. "My father heard all of that and then he turned it into a deal," she said. "Because that's the only language he knows. He doesn't know how to be soft. He knows how to shake hands and call something done." A soft exhale. "He came to you with an offer because that's how he shows people they're worth something." She looked down at the lanyard on the arm of the chair. "When he came home that night and told me he'd called you in, he said..." She stopped. Her voice shifted. Lower, like she was repeating something that had stayed inside her. He said, "Marry my daughter, and everything is yours." The yard went still around us. And he asked me if that was all right. She looked up at me. Her eyes were bright. The last light of the evening caught them. She whispered, "I already agreed." I sat very still, not because I was surprised. Because I felt it settle, the truth of it, and I needed a moment before I could move. She had gone to him first. She had chosen before there was an offer. Before there was a deal. Before her father had turned it into the language he knew. She'd already known. I picked up the lanyard from the arm of the chair. I didn't put it back on my belt. I set it on the table beside her water glass. "Derek's wrong," I said. "Derek doesn't know everything," she said. "No," I said. "He doesn't." She exhaled slowly. Her shoulders settled like she'd been holding herself up against something and could finally stop. "I don't need you to stay for the company," she said. "I need you to stay because..." She stopped herself. "Because?" I asked. She said, "Because you put a lot of yourself into things, and I don't want to watch you walk away without telling you that I see it." The air between us was very warm. I reached across the space and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. Ellie told her father about the medical call a week later. He tried to be evasive about it the way he tried to be evasive about anything that made him feel less than completely in control. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and waited him out. And eventually he told her the truth. He was working with a cardiologist. There was a treatment plan. It wasn't a death sentence, but it was serious, and he had known for 3 months before he called me into that office. He apologized to her for keeping it from her, in the only way Frank could, by squeezing her hand and saying, "I just didn't want you to worry," before I had a plan. Ellie told me about that conversation later, sitting on the same back porch. She didn't cry, but her voice was thick. "He said he wanted to make sure I had something real before he told me," she said. "Something he could trust to hold." I said, "That sounds like Frank." "Yeah," she said, "it does." We got married the following spring. Not a big event. The crew came. My mother cried. Frank wore a bolo tie and shook my hand 4 times. Derek sent a congratulations card and didn't attend, which was fine. Some things take longer to settle than others. Ellie took over the business development side of the company. She was better at it than anyone expected, which meant she was exactly as good as she had always been. People just hadn't been paying attention before. I kept running the builds. The company grew steadily. Not dramatically, not in ways that ended up in press releases. Just the kind of growth that happens when people do real work and treat each other decently. Frank's treatment went well. He was at the yard 3 days a week by summer. He drove Ellie and me crazy in the best possible way, second-guessing the materials orders, insisting he still knew the subcontractors better than we did, asking me every Monday if I had checked the punch list like I hadn't been checking punch lists for years. I let him. Some things you don't rush. The oak table I finished that winter is in our kitchen now. It has coffee rings and a stack of bills on it, and the blueprints I spread out there on Sunday mornings. There are initials scratched into the corner, not mine, and not put there by me. Ellie did it one evening without asking. 2 letters. Quiet and sure, like everything she did. I saw it the next morning and didn't say a word about it. There are things you build because you need proof that you're still here. And there are things that become the proof themselves, not because you planned them that way, but because something true grew into them, and you were finally paying enough attention to let it. I was a man with a lanyard and a workshop and a life that was decent and completely still. She was a woman who went to her father before anyone made a deal. And that, in the end, was the whole story.